called Job. I'm not talking about Steve Jobs. I'm not offering a job. This is Job. Who here has actually heard of the character of the Bible, Job? You hear? Okay, some of you guys. Okay. Well, it's going to be good to be able to explain the person of Job and also what he has to teach us today about life and also about suffering. Just a quick poll. Okay? Quick poll. Who here likes pain and suffering? Who here likes pain and suffering? Okay, we have a masochist. Okay, good. Yeah, it makes us know we're alive. Okay, well that's a good reason. That's a good reason. Well, like most people, I don't like pain. I hate suffering. But you know, whether I like it or not, it still comes my way. It still impacts me and the people who I care and love. And so, many times I just feel helpless. I don't know how to find meaning and purpose to all the pain and suffering that I've seen other people go through, and even as I've gone through. And I know that there's suffering even in this room, and in different parts of the world that, you know, I can even barely imagine. That their degree of suffering is so great. And so, it's usually, though, the suffering that's close to us that is more meaningful. Right? I mean, do you agree with that? It's, you know, there's people who are suffering in other parts of the world. Their suffering can be really devastating, but it's actually the suffering that's close to us that impacts us the most. I know for me, it's my wife's suffering. I mean, my wife grew up in a single-parent home, and her dad left when she was still a baby. And so she, you know, she would tell me of stories of how she would be sitting by the front steps of her apartment, and all dressed up, waiting for her dad to come to pick her up. And you know what? Many times, he didn't show up. And she was crushed and devastated, like, what did I do? How come he doesn't love me? And so there's those kind of images that's still from the past. And, you know, because she grew up in a single-parent home, I mean, they struggled. She and her mom struggled financially, even though her mom did her best to try to raise her up. And around her university time, her mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And she lived a life of debilitation until she died at the age of 67. So still fairly young. But around the time that her mom was diagnosed with MS, actually when her mom died, Colette started, also my wife, started experiencing some health challenges as well. And so we thought actually it was MS. And so we went to all the different doctors, but we found out that it was actually chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And so she's got both. So in most days, she has debilitating pain that she can't sleep. And then she's so fatigued during the times that she can't go out. So many times she'll only go out once or twice a week. And so she's been housebound. And so this has been the pain and suffering that I see on a regular basis as we're together. And I know there's a number of you who can relate to that. So whether it be your a health challenge, or whether it be some of your own personal situation, and you feel the weight and the crushing blow of pain and suffering. And also, it's not just the physical pain that you actually go through, but it's also the emotional pain that comes with some of that, right? Sometimes you feel like you're alone in your suffering because you're out of sight and out of mind. If you're sick, you're stuck at home. And then that people also misunderstand you. Like either, oh, they're lazy, or oh, you must not have enough faith. That's why you're not well. All those kind of things. And also, you feel like, you know, the things that you love to do, you can't even do, even the basic things. I know for my wife, like even taking a shower is a big deal. So, and you know, for some of you, you can relate to that. And you know what, maybe you're here and you might not even be able to identify with your own kind of suffering or a lot of suffering in your own life, but you can identify with some of the suffering in the world or even in our community. So, you know of the ethnic cleansing that's happening in Eastern Europe, or even the whole crisis with ISIS nowadays, with sex slavery that's happening in Southeast Asia, with the drought and the famine that hits Africa many, many times. And you wonder, why does God allow all of that evil and suffering in the world? what have I done? Is God punishing me? And those are questions that come up. So you come up with possibly 3 conclusions. You might conclude that, one, that God doesn't exist. That we're just here by accident, and there's really no God, and we're just alone in this universe, just acting out what would be this kind of cosmic accident. So that could be one conclusion you can come to. Or you can come to a second conclusion, in that there is a God, but that God actually doesn't care. He doesn't love us. He just kind of created us, kind of wound up the world like a clock, and just kind of let us go. Right? He doesn't really care. Or the third conclusion is there is a God, He does love us, but He's not powerful enough to do anything about our pain and our suffering. So and there's a whole bunch of in-betweens to that. It could be a mixture. And that's kind of what we sometimes can conclude. And so with that, we begin to wonder, does God really love us? Is God even there? And that's why I was drawn to the story of Job. When I was thinking about all the different characters of the Bible to talk about today, I was drawn to the character of Job because Job is synonymous to suffering. Of all the people who suffered in the Bible, apart from Jesus on the cross, Job has got to be it. And we'll get more to that in a little bit, because Job lost everything. He lost everything that he owned, everyone he held dear, his children, and his life kind of collapsed, and it seemed like even God abandoned him. So imagine with me that you're lying in the hospital, and you're in pain, and you're just barely hanging on for dear life. A tornado has destroyed everyone that you love and everything that you own. Every one of your children is dead. I mean, that itself is devastating. But all that you've worked for, your car, your house, your business, all your savings, gone. Okay? Your spouse, the one who you think will walk with you during this devastating time, is actually not supportive of you at all. Right? And all your friends who you think will be there actually is pointing the finger at you. It's your fault. That's why you're in this mess. And again, I think that's why most people, the rest of us, are drawn to Job as well. Because in the end, it's almost like Job represents us, humanity. I mean, if you look at the story of Job, there's really not a lot of mention about the law, the commandments, even the temple or the nation of Israel. But it talks about suffering. And I think that's why we can really identify with Job. He understands, he's understood by the poor, the oppressed. He is understood by the prisoner, and anyone who's really known any kind of pain, right? That's why people can relate to him. So what does Job, this ancient character, thousands of years ago, actually existed? What does he have to teach us about life today, in 2014? Well, for that, we have to look at the Bible and to actually see who this person Job was. Okay, so chapter 1 of Job. And Job is found, again, in the Old Testament, just before the book of Psalms, for those of you who are curious. So, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and a large number of servants. Man, that's a lot of animals. So actually, if you could keep the lights on, people have said that they want to be able to see what they're eating. Thank you. Just the feedback I've got. A large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of these. Thanks, Mel. Okay, so that tells us a lot about this person, Job. One, that Job was from the land of Uz. Uz actually means literally east. So he was a man from the east. And, experts, archaeologists tell us that that's actually the land of Edom, where the Edomites were, who were actually enemies of Israel. And so what we get from that is that Job was a Gentile. He was not an Israelite. And this is important. This is important for us to know because it actually tells us that God didn't pick a religious person from Israel. He picked a Gentile. Someone who actually the Israelites despised as the person who, didn't know God. But God picks a person to teach us a lesson who wasn't just from the nation of Israel. So he was a Gentile. We also see that it says that Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. So, I mean, he was wealthy. He was influential. I mean, that basically was a billionaire in those days. If you were to translate all his kind of possessions, that's a billionaire in those days. So he was a very wealthy man, what they called a patriarch, like Abraham was. And a patriarch is basically the head of a very large family. In fact, as you number that, experts tell us that kind of adds up to about 1,000 people. It's like a small town that was with Job and his family, with his servants and their families. And so we knew that he was an influential, powerful man. But not only that, because we've known of influential, powerful people who were evil. But there's something very unique about Job, that he said he was blameless and upright, he feared God and he shunned evil. Now, when the Bible says there that it's blameless and upright, it doesn't mean that he was without blame here, that he wasn't perfect. It means that he was above reproach, that no one could bring a public charge against him. In fact, in the rest of the book of Job, it says that he helped the poor, he lent freely to them, and he helped those who were in need. So that's what we find out about Job. So we go on and find out a little bit more. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When the period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. Okay, so that tells us actually something else about Job, that he offered these sacrifices. And you can tell a lot about a person by how he or she relates to God. Right? Job's regular morning sacrifice tells us something very specific about what Job believed about God. Because in these sacrifices, and we've talked about this before, and when he's offering these animal sacrifices, it was a foreshadowing of what he knew God was going to do. That he was going to send the perfect sacrifice, who we know to be Jesus, to take away the sins of the world. And so, in offering these sacrifices, Job was saying, I believe in a God who actually forgives sin. That he's merciful and compassionate, and that he forgives sin through that perfect sacrifice, as was represented by these animal sacrifices. And then we also know that he was a priest. He was a priest for himself and for his household. So he believed that the forgiveness just wasn't for himself, but it was for other people as well. And that's really what a priest is. They say that a priest is someone who stands, who represents God, people before God, and who represents God before people. So again, that's very, very important. And so we see now that all of a sudden that the story turns. For those of you who are familiar with the story, this story about Job turns in a very, very drastic way. The writer of Job ushers us before the scene in heaven. And again, some of you are like, wow, that's kind of strange. But again, the Bible is a supernatural book. It doesn't just explain natural things, but supernatural things. And then, this is what the Lord says to Satan in this conversation. Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And this is what Satan says to God. Does Job fear God for nothing? It's almost like sarcastically, right? Satan replied, have you not put a hedge around him, like protecting him, and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the works of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. He will curse you to your face. Okay? So it's important to pause here because, when we're suffering and when we're in pain, we forget that there's another reality at work. There's an invisible reality. We can only see the visible. It hurts. We see our circumstances and it's painful. But there's also another work. The Bible tells us that there's an invisible reality that's happening. And our enemy, the enemy of our lives and of our souls, is Satan. And Satan is basically putting Job on trial. When God asked Satan what he thinks of his servant, the accuser is basically saying, Job is only a good man because you're good to him. right? He doesn't love you for yourself. He loves you for what the stuff you give him. Take away that stuff, and he's going to drop you like a hot potato. Like, he doesn't really love you for who you are. You know, some of us know that feeling, right? We've had friends who are what we call fair weather friends. They're friends only because we do something for them. But as soon as we are not able to, you're gone. And that's what the charge that Satan is giving against Job to God. He's saying, Dad, you know, he loves you because you've been so good to him. Take it all away, and he's going to curse you to your face. And in other words, really, the debate in heaven is whether or not human beings are really free to choose. Are they free to choose? Satan claims that faith is just basically a product of our environment and circumstance. Job was conditioned to love God. Take away all the positive rewards, and Job's faith will crumble. And you know, this is an important thing for us to talk about, because the issue of human freedom is very important, because it helps us to imagine, go back with me and think, imagine a world where everyone truly does get what he or she deserves. Because, right, you know, many times we say, oh, why did that happen? I don't deserve that. But now imagine with me a world where everyone gets what he or she deserves. In a perfect, fair world, morality would operate according to those fixed laws, just like the laws of nature. You know, like gravity. You throw something up, it'll come down again. So there would be punishment for wrongdoing, would work like physical pain. So if you touch a flame, you know, you get burned, right? There's a pain warning. So in a fair world, you would get punished when you sin, when you do something wrong, instantly and quickly. So let's give me an example. So let's say if you steal something. So in this world, in this perfect world where, you know, we think anyway, that we would get what we deserve, if we steal something, we get an electric shock. Oh, you know, okay, we know that's wrong. So, or if we do something right, we get this pleasure sensation. So let's say you're filling out your taxes, and you go, and you get this nice, you know, zap of just pleasure. Now, we think that, yeah, that's when we get a refund, right? No, it's like, as soon as you do something right, you get this pleasure sensation. It's almost like we're trained. Okay, bad, you get punished, and you get a zap, and then you do something good, and you get this pleasure sensation. Now, we might think this is an excellent world, because it's just, it's consistent, and we know clearly what God expects of us, right? Because sometimes we go, you know, I don't know what God expects of me. Fairness would reign. You know, we would think that that's exactly what we want. But it's actually a huge problem with this. There's a huge problem in this world. Because it's not the kind of world that God actually wants to accomplish on earth. Because really, there's two very important things to God. One is that he wants to give us freedom to choose to love him and to not love him. And he also has put into place natural laws that do not change. Okay, so let's first go back to the ability to love him freely. God basically is saying, I know it's so important for you to love me freely. Because if you had a boyfriend or girlfriend or a husband or a wife, and they were made to love you, would you feel like you're actually being loved? If they were forced or paid or coerced to love you, is that love? No. And so that's why it's so important for God to have free love. For us to freely love him, for us to be able, and for him to allow us to do that, he has to give us really, truly human freedom to choose to do that or to not. And so sometimes that comes also with evil and suffering. So God has allowed the universe to go on this way. Even it allows suffering in the world, because God has a much bigger plan than just allowing us to feel good and to have a good life. So yes, Job was on trial, but so was God. So in fact, God was actually more in trial. Because Satan was really trying to say, what he was trying to get at by this question was that, is God really worthy of our worship? Is God really so great and loving that he's worthy of our worship? He's allowed, even when he's allowed all this pain and suffering to enter into our lives. And so what happens next tells us what Job's answer is. Do you remember what Job's answer was? Let's find out what Job's answer was. At this is verse 20, chapter 1. At this, Job got up and tore his robe. So again, this is when all this devastation had happened in his life, right? He tore his robe, shaved his head, then he fell to the ground in worship. In worship. Now, I want to remind you that he was near death. He lost all his children. He lost everything that he possessed. So this is his response. He fell to the ground in worship, and he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Wow. Would that have been your first response? Certainly would not have been mine. In fact, I know when I look back at some of the pain and suffering I've endured, that was not my first response. And this teaches us a very important lesson. And so, basically, Job's answer to that question, is God worthy to be worshipped? He's saying yes. He clung on to God's justice when he was really actually the best example of God's injustice. He didn't just seek the giver because of the gifts. He actually sought God for himself. He fell to the ground and he worshipped. And you know, you wonder, well, how can he do that? I mean, that's the first thing I ask. How can Job do that? Well, it all goes back to what we were saying about him in the beginning. It was his regular habit to worship God. It was his regular worship habit to worship God. You know, this wasn't the first time that, you know, Job worshiped God. Like, every time so Job was worshiping God in everything, in the good and in the bad. So it became a custom, a habit, a practice for him to worship God. So even when the darkness came, he was able to worship God because he knew what God was like in the light. Don't decide who God is in the dark, for when you've already known him in the light. So, in your regular time of worship, we need to think about how that actually enables us to respond to when dark things, difficult things happen in our lives. And this is what regular time in worship helped Job do. One, he actually knew about himself, and he knew about God better. And this is how he knew about himself. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart." So basically he's saying, I came to this world with nothing, and I'm going to depart with nothing. And life is one big full circle. And my daughter, Elizabeth, you know, she always jokes around with me and says, "You better be nice to me, because when when you're old, I will be the one changing your diaper." That sounds like a threat. But that's just the reality of our lives, you know. We're young and we have a diaper. We're older, we go back to a diaper. Right? Sad, but true. Right? But that's what Job is actually saying. You know, naked I came from this, you know, in this world. And naked I'm going to depart. I came with nothing. Everything came from God. And so I'm going to depart with nothing. So he knew what life was like. And then he said, and the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. So that's another thing that we find out about what Job believed about God. Was that he believed that everything came from God. That everything that he had. That's why he was so thankful and he was so grateful. Comedian Jack Benny, upon receiving an award, actually once said, "You know, I really don't deserve this award," as he cradled his award. "I don't deserve this award. But then I have arthritis, and I don't deserve that either." And so, you know, that shows us, what that shows us is that we think that we deserve better, that we deserve a good marriage, that we deserve a good job, a good home, a good life, good health. That we deserve it, that God owes us that. But what Job is saying is this: no, God can give and God can take away. It all comes from God. And that came out of a heart of gratitude. And this is one thing that Job might have suffered a lot, but at least he didn't suffer in this way, that he wasn't feeling like his rights were violated. He knew. Like, you know, he's like, God, why are you this way? He's saying, no, God gave and God took away. So this is very important. And he still worshiped God. Okay? And so, despite the crisis in Job's faith, over and over again, he sees God in all of it. Not the blind forces of nature or the evil nature of people. He didn't say that it was the Sabaeans. He didn't say it was those marauders. He said it was actually God who did that. When Jesus was before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate said, "Don't you know that I have the power of life or death over you?" Remember that at the trial? You know, just Pilate said, "I could let you go." And Jesus' reply was this: "You have no power over me unless it was granted to you from above." So actually, God the Father was the one who allowed all of that to happen because of a much bigger plan. And that was to redeem us, to save us through Jesus. And so you might be sitting here saying, so Sam, are you saying that God is the cause of suffering? If the Lord gave and He takes away, is He the one who actually makes us suffer? That's the valid conclusion, right? And these are complex questions. And obviously a sermon like this is not gonna, won't even scratch the surface of that. There's books and books that's written about evil and suffering. And there's thousands of sermons that have been preached on it. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult topic and an emotional one. What we do know is that the Bible teaches, again, is that suffering on our planet has come about because of two principles that God's built on it, which I alluded earlier. The physical world runs according to consistent natural laws. There's natural laws in our world that God has put in, that He even doesn't usually break unless there's a miracle that's involved. Okay, and then He's put in human freedom. So let me give you an example of the natural laws that God's put in. Okay, give me a natural law. Does anybody know of a natural law that exists in nature? What's that? Gravity. That's a great example. So if you, we see there's good and bad things that come out of that, because gravity causes people to fall off a building and get hurt, right? Or you fall and you scrape your knee. But also gravity keeps us on the earth. If there was no gravity, if there's no gravitational pull of the earth, we'd all be flying off into the universe, into space. So gravity is both good in that it keeps us in space, but then that same natural law can sometimes cause harm. Okay? So that's important. Even hurricanes can cause death and devastation. But it also brings about the rainy season in many parts of the world. So if there's no rainy season, there's no harvest. Even bacteria we usually think is bad because it causes sickness. But bacteria actually helps us digest food. It helps us do many, many things that's important for the human body. So there's some very good things that come out. And again, those are natural laws that God in His creation has put in. And those are good things. But sometimes because of those natural laws, there's consequences that come out of that as well. And we think that, why doesn't God just intervene? Could you imagine living in a world where the natural laws were inconsistent? Like, one time there's no gravity, you're flying off, and all of a sudden there is, right? So it would be very difficult to live in this kind of world. Also, in a world where God doesn't intervene to stop evil, again, that sounds like why does God just not intervene to stop evil? Again, that sounds like paradise. Can you imagine like a murderer's knife turning into licorice? Or bullets turning into cotton balls? Again, God was stepping in all the time. A robber would be taking a couple of $1 million from a bank, and then suddenly the bank gets filled up again with money. There'd be no need for work. There's no need to take care of others, because there would be no real needs or dangers. I mean, all our consequences for bad things would just be changed. And again, that's not what God wanted for us. He wanted to produce in us good character qualities that can only sometimes come from suffering. And because that would create some very spoiled, hedonistic people. If, again, if you didn't have to worry about generosity or kindness or love or courage. So a world well-suited to promote pleasure is actually not good in the development of good characteristics or qualities in our lives. So is God the source of evil and suffering? Again, no. Because sin entered the world. Sin entered the world through our choice, the choice of Adam and Eve to rebel against God. And we say, well, why do we get punished for what Adam and Eve did? Adam actually means man, and Eve means woman. And so, really, they represent us. It could have been, you could have been Adam, and you could have been Eve. We would have done the same thing. So it represents who we are. And so again, this is what we see is that God is not the source of evil and suffering. So in the end, as we're wrapping this up, you just need to know this one thing. So out of all of that, we're wondering, Lord, why did you allow all of this? This is what this is how God responds to Job. I mean, his friends had forsaken him. His wife says, just curse God and die. And then he's asking all these questions about God. God, why aren't you there? And this is what God says. And the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Probably not the response you thought you'd get. Like you'd think that maybe God would come in and we just pat Job on the shoulder. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Or I'm really proud of you. You're gonna grow out of this. You're going to be a stronger person. But no, he actually chastises Job and says, "Where were you? Were you there when I created the heavens and the earth?" And so, what is God really saying through all of this? What is God saying? Well, many times for us, we echo what Job says. I mean, why does God, if you would only visit me, God, in my pain and suffering and give me some answers, I would be able to handle it. If I could just see you and hear you explain why I must go through this hard time, then I can endure. Well, Job got his wish. God showed up, and this is what God says. And in the end, God was saying, Job, if I can take care of the universe, I can take care of you. If I can run the physical universe, I can take care of the moral universe. You might not understand evil and suffering, but I want you to know this, that I have a much bigger plan and purpose. Because he's saying, are you powerful enough to do all these things? Again, the lesson that we see in Job are these things. That one, he fully accepts the responsibility of running the universe. And he's saying, can you trust me? And so basically that's what God was asking Job. Can you trust me? To the question, why do we suffer? He answers, not so much the reason. He doesn't give us the reason why we suffer, but again, to what end? Again, for those of you who are here and are just investigating the claims of Christ, this whole Christianity thing, I want to let you know that God is not happy with the state of the world too. He is actually redeeming it. He's come to actually rescue it. That's why Jesus came, to redeem the suffering. All the suffering of the world was on him. So you could put your trust in him. He's got a much better plan. But for the rest of us, for those of us who do trust in God, he's saying this, that I have a much better plan and purpose. And in all of this, at the end of Job's story is that, again, he has, he's restored, he gets all his flocks, even a double of what happened. And again, it's almost like a picture of heaven. It's not, again, like, you pray and God just blesses you. What God was trying to say at the end of Job is that I'm going to bless you, but that sometimes that can come in heaven. It's a foretaste of heaven. All the pain and suffering in this world will be taken away in that life. And so what Job is saying to believers is this, that he has prepared us for glory. This is what the Apostle Paul says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." See, our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory. And then he says in Romans, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." So we were made for glory. That our suffering and pain is actually for much, much greater than that. That God is preparing us for glory. So he just doesn't want us to be happy. He wants us to be holy. So as we, today, again, as a response to the message, we want to be able to express our faith. And part of our faith is, again, remembering Jesus' death on the cross, his broken body and his shed blood. And so for those of you who are here today and who believe that Jesus died for your sins, that he's cleansed you from all unrighteousness, that you put your trust and faith in him, come and partake of communion today at the Lord's Supper. But I want, before we go, these are just a couple of lessons that I think that we need to remember. If we want to be able to respond to God in worship during difficult times, we must develop a regular habit of worshiping God. So I want to encourage you to regularly adore God for who he is. And then our perspective of God shapes our perspective of our suffering. So shape your perspective of God through regular times in the Word. That's so important. Thirdly, God doesn't reveal his grand design in our suffering. He reveals himself. Because it's he who we need in our suffering, and not just his explanations. So call out to him in desperate prayer. And then God doesn't answer the question of why, but the question to what end. So focus on what he wants you to become. And then lastly, Jesus ends the story of suffering with glory. Suffering is not the end of the story. It's glory. He has made us for glory. So this is really our hope in our suffering. This is what gets us through. All right? So